Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the AI for Everyone podcast. I have a very powerful conversation coming up for you today. In the studio, we have MJ. She is the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Revenue Officer at Credibly.com. And she brings a very diverse background and point of view to AI. So she graduated from Harvard with a degree in literature. She studied at the Wharton School of Business, and then that led her to working in AI in fintech. So we really want to kind of dive in and understand how all that happened, especially now working in an industry where you're using cutting edge AI in an industry that is steeped in tradition and has a lot of risk if things go wrong. So let's jump into this conversation. Please welcome MJ.
Welcome to the AI for Everyone podcast.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I think we're going to have a pretty powerful conversation today because your background is very interesting to me, and you seem to have your finger in a lot of different places that I want to talk about. So, the one thing I do want to talk about a bit, and in the intro, I talked about your resume and your background. I noticed you came from like literature. Is that correct? And now you're
Yes.
deep into the
Yes.
world of AI and loans and education and all these different things. Can you talk about just a brief, how do you get from there to there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I majored in literature when I was undergrad at Harvard, and I would go back and do it all over again. I love reading. I love writing. I'm actually a writer in my spare time, and I write fiction and letters and things like that. So when I first graduated, I actually went into nonprofit. I was looking at a lot of human rights related issues, making grants. I worked in DC. And after 2 years of that, I realized if I'm going to be giving money to people, I kind of need to know how they're motivated and how to measure things and really understand how money sort of drives motivation. So I went back to business school, and I unexpectedly loved business school so much that I was originally intending to do a joint degree in international policy, but I actually gave it up because I loved everything about business, right? I just loved how competitive it was and how innovative and how a company could actually generate its own profits, which coming from nonprofit was hard to imagine. And so since then, I never looked back. I went into marketing at Ford Motor Company and did that for 8+ years. Did every piece of marketing you can imagine. And then one of my prior colleagues recruited me to Credibly, which is a fintech lending company. And so learning the world of small business. I've always had this angle, I think, of being championing the underdog a little bit. And so I think moving from human rights to, my classmates were going to investment banking consulting, and I was going to a car manufacturer in the Midwest, which I've never lived in. I didn't even know how to drive at the time, to now helping small business owners. I think my narrative maybe makes sense to me personally, even if on my resume it seems like it's sort of hopping all over the place.
Well, let's talk about those loans credibly, the company, AI, how that plays a role, because we know historically people of color, marginalized groups, all those kind of things have had not a fair shake when it came to lending, to business, to all those different things. Can AI come in and actually make a difference? Can it take those labels, those things out of the equation and actually get money into the hands of the people that should have it, that do deserve it? Or is it going to make that divide potentially even greater?
So the complicated and simple answer is it depends, right? Because supposedly, yes, AI, you can make it much more label blind. You can make sure that the processes are much more consistent. And so there's no bias being introduced, or minimize the bias that's introduced. Automation itself will take care of a lot of that. Where the risks are with AI in lending and pretty much anything that has to do with trying to figure out risk is there's two major things. One is obviously non-determinism, which is generative AI is still at some point a black box. So even though the hallucinations have been getting better over time, it doesn't produce the same result each time. People can't actually really explain why it decisions the way it decisions. So where you're using AI is going to be very important. If you're using AI to extract data, clean up data, that is more appropriate than using it for risk assessment, because you don't actually have the explainability behind the risk. The other thing is, obviously, and this is much more foundational, and this is one of the great things I took away from this class I took at Wharton around the legal and ethical implications of AI, which is AI is based on all training data. The training data that it is based on is itself biased because it's working on real world training data, right? So there's been famous experiments where it's very hard to get like a chat GPT or a Gemini to create an image of like a left-handed male, because there's so many images of right-handed people and just not as many images of left-handed people. That's gotten better over time. And you've seen these foundational models actually try to overcorrect for it, right? There's been a lot of funny things, or sometimes not so funny, of like, oh, generate me like a typical male of like the 1600s, and it would create someone or that you typically wouldn't associate with that period of time. It wouldn't create images of certain white males or minorities. There's been a lot of things like that. And that's because the companies are trying to make the training data match the real world representation, even at times historically it may be inaccurate. So this idea that AI is going to be unbiased and fair is not true, because the data that it's trained on is real world data, which is already already biased. Most of the models now are using synthetic data, which some people have problems with. I actually think that could be better. So I think the answer to your question is, in places like lending or risk assessment, is AI going to be better? It depends on how you use it. And are the organizations aware of all of these little things that are happening in the background, so that you're not pushing the AI to places where it really shouldn't go, and you're aware that it's trained on things that's already problematic. And so you have to accommodate and adjust for that.
In some of my trainings, I've done the test of, it's kind of along the same lines, but generate an image of a full glass of wine, like to the brim, overflowing. It couldn't do it because all the data is, wine glasses are typically
Mhm.
a quarter, maybe a third full, right? They're not full, they're not overflowing. So it really struggled with that.
Right.
So I think that's a great example. Okay, so now let's address the fear and let's get that out of the way because I've seen you, I've seen some of your other stuff. You talk about AI as an augmentation and not a replacement. But yet right now we are seeing
Mhm.
Walmart CEO. I worked at Ford for 12 years. We have that in common. We see Ford CEO. We're
Yeah.
seeing some really high end people come out and say they're not going to be hiring people, that this is coming in and taking jobs. And I'm with you. I think AI can amplify the person and not replace them, but they have to put themselves in that position to be there. So, can you explain to me how you approach this and what you meant by that comment?
Yeah, I am lucky enough to be working for a company that is not so large. And also, we're in an industry where it's not a zero sum game, it's not a mature industry. And so I'm very privileged to be able to say I'm very confident the way that we're deploying AIs to free up our constraints, and that we are going to be upskilling people and making sure that we can do more with less, but we're not going to be replacing. I think that for companies that are really large, like Walmarts and Fords, and people who've come out and taken a stand and said, well, we're going to use AI to replace jobs, or we're not going to hire any more people, I kind of question what is the incentive to do that, right? I mean, obviously, there's shareholder meetings, and I think being able to use AI to be efficient is very attractive right now. But there's certain areas where there is going to be disproportionate growth that's required. And I don't see anyone talking about that. One area that's very clear to me is, as you're deploying models and automating workflows, you're also going to have to implement checks and balances. One of the things we talked about even with Credibly is how the quality control team, the QA/QC team that routinely checks for errors and routinely tries to give feedback to the teams on what they can do better, that team has to fundamentally change, upskill, and grow. Because once you implement large language models, you're able to do a lot more. But once you do more, you also have to monitor and check more, right? So when you are able to deploy AI to increase scale or do more, understanding that in order to make sure the quality is persistent, you also have to have human checks along the way. We're not at an age yet where an LLM can then be the safeguard and the supervisor of another LLM solely without human intervention. So that's one area that I think the quality control areas of any company is going to be expected to grow. And most companies are not ready for it because the skill sets are not there. So you really have to actually upskill your team. The other thing to think about as well is AI as its own agent in terms of being able to sort of hand over the reins to check and to develop institutional knowledge. How are then you going to cultivate your experts? You cannot get to a point where there's no more experts to understand how to check these models. These models are getting increasingly sophisticated. They look and sound real, and they actually are so good at producing persuasive and realistic results that if you don't have your human experts fully involved in understanding where the models are breaking down, you actually don't know when it's going to be wrong. And that's really dangerous. Every single one of these companies like Walmart and Ford, and I've worked at Ford, I know these companies, right? They've had outages with vendors. We've had outages with third-party vendors. We have them internally. It's very painful when you're relying on a piece of software or something, a platform to say you're going to be up 99+% of the time. Once you have an outage, as inevitably in the digital world you will, who are your experts that are coming in to take over that process? I think these are questions from a human resource and development perspective. The C-suite of these companies, hopefully behind the scenes, are having these conversations. There is going to be growth in ancillary areas that they have to be really careful of. How are you cultivating your human expertise to recognize when the models are starting to break down? And how are you continuing to make sure that you have institutional knowledge and ways of working where when you do have outages, your customers are not suffering? Right? These are three fundamental questions. Well, I haven't even talked about cybersecurity, where I think every company is going to have to address.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit too about the human psychology, because I'm seeing it now and I'm seeing it grow. I'm seeing a resistance to AI. We've already seen all the people that kind of jumped on as early adopters. We're excited. This is a game changer. All the hype that goes with that type of movement. But now we're kind of at that stage where we're seeing people really, really fighting against it. I don't know if you saw the marketing campaign. I think it was last week for friend.com in New York City. They spent a ton
Yes,
of money
yes.
on the subway, right? Up and down, billboards all over the place. And this is like, for anybody that doesn't know, it's like a necklace that you wear, and it's your friend. It's your little AI friend that will
Hmm.
talk to you and kind of be your buddy. These things were vandalized
Yep.
like crazy. All
Yep.
kinds of very
Hmm.
negative things that were put on those billboards. And I probably shouldn't have been shocked to see it, but I think I'm shocked to see it so early in the game because I don't know. I bought this, if you remember the Rabbit R1, and this is a really nice orange paperweight that sits on my desk. And we saw the humane pen, right? It was before its time, but we did see OpenAI bring on, Apple, Joni Ivy, the designer from Apple, and they're gonna design some form of a pen of something like that. We're seeing Meta
Hmm.
with the glasses, so I understand the psychological barrier when it comes to, say, a police state, a surveillance state, all those different things being recorded 24/7, but we also can't avoid it at this point. So, can you just give some advice on how can people kind of understand that their fears are valid, but yet they're
Hmm.
gonna have to overcome these fears because if you're gonna function in this future workforce, you're not hiding from this.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the fears are coming from, I would say, probably three areas, right? Where I've seen there's been much more, I would say, controversial discussions around AI are around mental health, children's education, and creativity. And they're linked. And these are real areas, and I think people are also learning from the backlash of social media, where these companies came out with these products that were major distribution platforms, vertically integrated, right? Got developers onto the platform, started building all these third party apps, then gained enough market power to start locking the access down. You can imagine, the most advanced models being locked down in the future for the elite. That's certainly a version of the future that's possible. And then parents and individuals are kind of left to deal with these addictive algorithms targeting children that and changing their brain chemistry that we're only now starting to really respond to. the AI labs have a role to play here, and I think they're doing a better job of coming out with constraints. So professionally, I think my advice is really understanding where you choose to work with AI. And so I've always talked about learning as a process of intention and attention. So if you're using AI to displace intention or attention, then you're not going to get as much out of it as if you're using it in a way to augment intention or attention. And these are individual choices, right? Are you using it to brainstorm? Are you using it to look at different voices and write different drafts of things that you actually work with it on co-creating versus just telling it to create AI content, which by the way, spam filters will pick up immediately in the future, right? Are you using it as a shortcut to quality versus using it to help you hone quality? And these are things that I think responsible users and organizations are going to have to really start asking and not necessarily depend on the government or on the companies themselves to come out with frameworks, which they also will. In the areas I think people are most sensitive about is trying to figure out how it's going to impact children, how it's going to impact mental health. We've seen a lot of sort of companions maybe mislead or come up with recommendations that parents feel very strongly about and displacing actual therapy and people needing help. And then also how kids learn, right? And so again, I think these are early conversations, but people are right to be nervous about these things because we've had experience with technology before that the catching up to some of the bad effects, we're seeing entire generations be affected by it. I am very hopeful though in the resilience of humans being brought up with certain technologies and being able to form their identity around the technology. So I see less of a risk with, say, my kids than with myself. But on the professional track, those three areas aside, learning how to use AI in a responsible and ethical way that protects the things you really care about is important. Creativity is another really big one because I think you see artists and writers saying, well, if anyone can just do what I can do, then it really threatens their sense of self-worth, right? So, and I think I can see it in both ways. I think for me, being able to create business presentations, using pre-made graphics, I think that's great. Would I ever use it for my personal writing where I have a lot of pride? No, I wouldn't because it really chips away at who I am. And I think everyone has to make these determinations, but society as a whole too has to recognize that the creative journey where there's emotion and pain and personal growth that comes with literature and art and music, those are the things people respond and resonate with. And the kind of AI generated things that frankly, like any amateur person can create, I think over time you're going to see spam and filters and people moving away from that content because it's not authentic and humans will always respond to authenticity.
Totally agree. I just gave a talk at the Indiana Filmmakers Network and addressed a lot of these issues. And I'm like, if you're an independent filmmaker, you should be so excited because you now have access to a lot of different tools that only the big studios had access to, or you had to run CGI or spend millions of dollars to get where you want to go. On top of that, I look at Sora 2, which just got released about 48 hours ago as we record this. And of course, I'm on there and I'm really looking at creating a story. And then how can I tie that story to a brand or to market something or to push it out? But what are the bulk of the videos? Crude, comedy. I mean, we could say entertaining, but we know that the masses where they're going to default to. And it's still going to be those true creatives, the people who have that talent that are gonna pull the most out of it, and that's what's gonna rise to the
Yeah.
top. Same with Suno. Now, Suno's a little bit different than I think kinda creating visuals, but, we'll see where that goes. So I agree with you fully on the creative side. On the mental health side, I just did an experiment. I built Barnabas, which is kind of my mentor AI app, and I literally logged everything in my life for 30 days, literally
Wow.
everything. And I wanted to do a few things with that. One, I lost 7 pounds as I had it coach me through my nutrition. It improved the relationship with my wife because there were times when, say, friction came up, I would actually defer to Barnabas before I would say anything, and it created less
Mhm.
friction, and it created a date night, and it kinda gave us this really good framework that, those of us in business and entrepreneurs, sometimes we let that stuff kind of slide, right?
Hmm. Yep.
So I see the benefit there. But what I'm really excited to talk with you about is education, because I work now a lot in education. I built a training academy at Indiana Wesleyan University for AI. I am teaching the Intro to AI certification course at Ivy Tech here in Indianapolis. And we're seeing things like Alpha School grow, Magic School integrated with the teachers, and all these different platforms. But the one I want to address with you is Alpha School, because this is growing. This is growing faster than most people realize. It's in Texas, it's in Florida. I think it's starting to move up the East Coast now. And for anybody not familiar, they basically, the teachers are 2 hours of AI that gives the trainings, but then they do expand the rest of the time in real world, real life scenarios. Do you see this trend continuing? How much of it will replace a teacher? And yeah, how are we going to deal with some of those negatives? Because some parents just aren't going to want this to happen at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. I also think, the landscape is gonna vastly change, right? And I sort of go back to kind of what are the problems that this is solving for? Because if the platforms and the newer ed tech startups and AI technologies are solving for things like kids not having access to certain kinds of content, not having access to certain kinds of, let's say, foreign language teachers because the schools are under resourced, right? Or certain types of translation because they're ESL and they actually don't have the ability to work with people on their English skills. Because I was an ESL student. Um, and we know that education funding and teachers, and there's depending on where you live and zip codes and sort of where you are, you may be in an under resourced area. So to the extent that an AI tool can help augment and relieve the pressure on the system and give kids who prior did not have access to certain types of experiences or content or materials, I think that's great. I think that is AI is intended to do that and be democratizing and lift people out of like being resource constrained. To the extent that it is replacing teachers and other students being able to interact and have personal connections and inspire in a one-to-one session, right? And make comments on their papers that are and there are teachers and coaches that I think they see the spark in kids and they have the experience to recognize there's something special or different about this child and I'm going to work with them differently. To the extent that an AI replaces that, I don't think it can replace that, and I think it's detrimental. The thing about great teachers, and I've had great teachers and I've had terrible teachers, is that you can have AI replace all the terrible stuff because there are plenty of teachers who don't care, who don't create their materials, right? They're also overworked, and there's obviously other issues with the education system. But I've had teachers who literally like, they're just like, you come into my class for 40 minutes, all you're doing is work on a workbook. I'm not going to talk to you and engage with you, right? That person eventually got let go. This happened in high school. But these are not the education experiences I want my kids to be having. I've also had brilliant teachers who recognize my talent as a writer, who talk to me in ways that other people had never have, and who saw something in me that like I couldn't get anyone else, including my own parents, to recognize. And those are the teachers I'm never going to forget. And so I think everyone has had combinations of these. So we just have to figure out where are we using AI to actually improve the experience, but not take away from that human touch, which frankly, through teachers being experienced interacting with a lot of different students, they have certain intuitions that like you just can't get from behind the screen. And so that's where I think making sure that the ed tech companies recognize that and relieve the constraints and augment the materials and access, I'm all for that. But don't forget that humans do have that special touch.
I cannot agree more with that. We did a program called the AI Protege Program, and of course we did it in an affluent area and we did it in a marginalized community. And I can tell you the only difference between those kids was 3 days. Because the affluent kids, of course, they have all these devices and they're kind of used to the technology. If anything, they took it. It was harder with them because they took things, I think, a little bit more for granted
Yeah.
than the marginalized kids. But working with them, of course, that first day they're kind of, they're not really engaging. The second day they're engaging a little bit more. But by the third day, you could see their eyes open. It's like, you mean to tell me I can do anything I want. Yes. What's your passion? Let's do
Mhm.
whatever that is. Let's integrate it into you want to write a book, you want to write a song, you want to do a podcast. What do you want to do? We can help you do that. And I've had a couple of those kids come up to me and say, nobody's ever told me I could do whatever I want.
Mhm.
And that alone, just those words alone were the empowerment enough to get them to get excited to do something. And it was less about AI and more about them.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point that we need to make sure that we're addressing with people, especially as we're rolling this out. We're training, we're upskilling. The people are fearful. It's more about you, your wisdom. AI is not going to replace somebody like you, MJ, right?
I hope
You're
not.
going to bring more to the table because but you're still going to be able to extract the knowledge out of those systems, but it's your wisdom that amplifies it and actually makes that knowledge valuable.
Yeah, I think also there's a huge it's very attractive right now, and there's a huge impetus in a lot of, experts in the field to make determinations and to kind of say like this is where we're heading, this is what AI is about. And honestly, like we are just too early, right? And it's going to get more complicated over time as all good technologies should, because generative AI is so imbued with how society is actually has evolved and will evolve that I see really a patchwork of good and bad and complexities. And I think it's human nature sometimes to just say like, I just tell me what to think, like just simplify this for me. But it's not gonna be that simple. And I think that's where a lot of people want to just have an opinion about, well, it comes down on one way or the other. I can tell you, even in our own implementation, at Credibly, right? I've seen the things people build evolve over time from trepidation to nervousness to excitement. And now people are building very complicated widgets that help with their own work because they've had confidence around it. And they're starting to think about how to integrate into the enterprise level. So I've even told different executive leaders that the company or your organization has to move at different speed. Not all functions or people or individuals should be adopting AI at the same rate with the same kind of tools. That is a failure, right? If your company is making AI a one size fits all, it is fundamentally wrong. And I will die on that hill. And that also means that leaders are not taking time to think through the impact, the complexities around AI to figure out where does it work? Where does it not work? And why? And these are real decisions that are going to challenge thought leadership. I do believe I've written a couple of op-eds about this, where I do think in a lot of areas AI is going to have to raise the bar. It's going to start forcing mediocre to be better. It's going to start forcing questions of expertise. We just did a marketing experiment where we're looking at how we think about using real world signals to segment and talk to customers. And I will tell you, if those pilots are successful, marketing segmentation and the way marketing has been done for the last 50 plus years, we're going to change that now, right? Because there's new ways to look for patterns and what people are talking about and what they're thinking about. And that's great, right? So now I'm talking to these domain experts who are new to this space and they're bringing their expertise. And I have to push them to say, your expertise is going to have to evolve now into working with these tools and being open to new ways of how we think about customer behavior and customer data. That's only going to make them better and more effective marketers. It's not going to sacrifice the experience they already have. It's going to be using their experience to optimize for things in a new world. But you can't scale experience. That's the thing. You can accelerate learning, but experience comes only with time, and we only have so much time in a day. And so I think leaders have to look at the complexities of AI and embrace it and really put out. I would love to see companies put out more announcements around, we're driving AI in this part of our company. We're leaving this one to learn a little bit slower. We're not touching this piece until we figure it out. These to me are more real applications than headlines that saying like, we're going to be AI first, we're going to be 85% AI adoption. Like, I don't know what those things mean, nor do I understand if they have internal buy-in, nor do I understand the incentives to do that. This is a new technology. There are no real experts yet. The models we are using are the worst that you'll ever use in your lifetime. And so learning how to change manage is more important than coming out with predictions of what it's going to be right
Okay, and let's talk a bit more about Credibly because some people might have some concern with AI being used when it comes to fintech, to banking, to whatever that is. And you're very AI forward. but all the big banks are too. They might just not be
Yeah,
talking about it in the same way, right?
right.
How can you address some of those issues that somebody might have with their information? You talked about cybersecurity, because I don't think most people even understand really what AI is outside of, say, a ChatGPT. And we know
Mhm.
there's been some leaks and some Google things there. They don't understand cloud. They don't understand that security. How are you dealing with governance within the company, and how are you keeping all that data safe as you're using this really new technology?
Yeah, and I think again, these are evolving questions, right? And I think that the way that we have looked at it from Credibly, and I would encourage all companies to do so, is to internally have and develop an evolving ethical use policy. And we certainly have it as part of the employee handbook, right? We tell people what kind of information they can or cannot put into these systems, what's an enterprise license, what's an individual license, et cetera. We work with the third parties and vendors. We make sure if we have third party vendors that they go through security questionnaires. And then we also work to safeguard our own internal data, right? We don't deploy AI in every part of the data structures. We have right now, I think a lot of the AI, the companies are coming up with MCP, so it's sort of connections through the large language models, giving access to your data in a standardized way. Certainly, that's a new standard, and just like APIs, companies should be looking to adopt that. Companies like OpenAI, Google, and the big foundational models, they're really going to be the ones that have to own that trust factor because frankly, if JP Morgan Chase is hooked in and their data is in there, I'm not super concerned about my one drop of data when there's so much information that an LLM is being looking at and they're actually creating data because there's such a thirst for data. The security concerns are really based out of these big tech companies, which we all know also have had leaks. I'm more concerned in terms of two areas, and I think for companies of our size, which is that medium-sized company, there's the areas that I think people should be thinking about and looking at is when you're working with other software developers that are building on top of the large language models. They don't have the same sort of security protocols or experience or guardrails in place. You really should be vetting to see how much experience they have, right? Do they understand what data is being exposed? How are they controlling for that? Who they're sharing that with? That's more of a risk than working with the foundational models directly themselves. Then the other thing to keep in mind as well is like what are your own internal guardrails, what are the database structures, right? Are you employing best in class security methods, and do you have things like preventing sort of outages, and you're practicing what happens if someone hijacks into your system? Like, are you looking at these things as part of your normal security hygiene? And so cybersecurity and data privacy and leaks that come with AI, they're going to be an issue, but these are similar issues to ones that we have right now with data privacy, where people's personal information, credit cards, health records, all stored pretty much in the cloud in like all major companies. And so I don't expect that to go down. I think security hygiene is important. I do think that working with third party vendors, that's an area where when companies are accelerating to try to adopt or outsource their AI competencies, they have to really make sure they're reading those agreements pretty carefully.
Okay, so a couple more questions, and I think this is a big one for almost any company in America right now, and absolutely in your industry: regulation. We're seeing right now, in the United States at least, like almost no regulation at the federal level. In Europe, we're seeing the polar opposite, right? Very heavy regulation. Latin America seems to be kind of somewhere in the middle of where we are right now. Um, if you're trying to run a company and you're using AI, how are you going to navigate if the federal doesn't do something and leaves everything state to state? Because that's almost going to be near impossible to navigate.
Yeah, I do think there will probably be federal regulation. I mean, AI is already being regulated. It's just not done so through like the AI Act, the way that Europe has this sort of so strictly put out there. And actually, I think Europe is kind of backtracking, right? Because they want to foster innovation and growth. And so there's a little bit of, hey, are we really going to put some teeth on this, or is it just more for show? I do think the US is going to eventually have to move to a federal standard. Right now, the different states they have different rules, and it's also being regulated through other means, consumer protection, privacy, et cetera, Fair Lending Act, right? Those are other regulatory bodies and works in place that's sort of touches on the subject of using AI. But eventually, I think there's a lot of energy, even just through lobbying by certain tech companies, to have that federal standard so that companies don't have to work through this patchwork of regulation, which we're small enough that like it's not as big of an issue for us right now. But you can imagine like the global companies, especially that have business in Europe and business in Asia, now they're dealing with multi-regional types of regulations, which is even more of a headache. And so I think the sooner that we have a better federal standard and a better federal guidance, that's going to help certainly the commerce and business sector. And I would be a proponent of that as well.
And one of a more personal question here, and then we're going to do a speed round.
Okay.
You actually studied under Ethan Mollick. What was
I
that like?
Well, I love Professor Mall. Like, I actually had one lecture by him because it was through a legal aspect of AI, was through legal and ethical implications, which was by Kevin Warbach of Wharton, which is my business school. So we had a lecture by Ethan, and I loved it. I'm actually going back on campus in November to take a class specifically with him and some of the other professors. I think it's great. He's a really good thought leader. I follow him on LinkedIn. I encourage everyone to subscribe to him as well. He doesn't know who I am, and hopefully I ingratiate myself with him when I'm back on campus. But I just think he's a really fair and clear speaker. He has a lot of access to the early AI models. He does this thing with otters, which I think is he speaks very clearly on his perspective. And he kind of removes the hype, right? He's also an academic and he lays out the data for you and he acknowledges when he's wrong. And these are all good things. These are good things you would expect of like journalists, for example. What I don't like are people who jump on a study, on a paper, pull out a headline, and then write really sensationalized topics. I think if you follow actual studies by professors, look at both sides. One thing that's great to do, honestly, is to take the latest AI paper, pop it into ChatGPT, and say, summarize this for me, and also present a critique of the paper, right? And that really helps you. We have these tools now because I can't read academic studies without falling asleep. But I do this all the time just so I understand a little. But I also ask it to provide a critique so that I can see both sides. And so, yeah, Ethan Mollick is great. He's kind of a superstar. But there's other up and coming. Andrew Ng obviously does a bunch of these types of courses. And there's really good voices just on these topics overall. And I wish I had more time to read them. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed everything that Wharton has to offer. I'm probably going to try some other schools as well. And I highly encourage the C-suite of most companies take one of these classes, right? Don't be afraid. This is the time to get back into academia. Academics typically don't move as fast in terms of technology, but the thought leadership often is pretty good. And so why not take advantage of the best schools if you have the resources, pay that money and take an online course and really get yourself involved in having a point of view, which I think is important for all leaders.
Yeah, I agree because I have that challenge when you make content online and do the things that I do. Like that's what interests me, what you just talked about. But unfortunately, as I put out good content, that type of stuff gets crickets. But if I say AI's taken over the world and we're doomed, 40,000 views, right? And hundreds of comments. And it's very unfortunate because we need to find that common sense and really understand what's happening here. And I appreciate people like you that are willing to come on and actually talk about what's really happening, right? The challenges, the regulations, the way businesses run, and just the real talk about what's happening. All right, well, let's do the speed round. So the speed round is just
All
I'm going to
right.
give you 5 questions,
Okay.
just one word or one sentence type of quick answers for these. And if
Oh,
you
wow.
get stuck, that's okay. We can go right on to the next question. All right, you're ready. You're ready. What is the
Okay.
most overhyped AI buzzword that's out right now?
Autonomous agents.
What is the most underrated human skill in the AI era?
um, Experts who are able to identify when the models stop working.
What is the first app or AI tool that you use in the morning?
Oh, it's ChatGPT. I'm sorry, but yes, I do use it.
I love it. What is one book that you would recommend to somebody who is internally challenged right now with AI?
I have to find the title, but it's something along the lines of like AI and snake oil. It's I have to find you the actual resource, and I'll probably send it to you over email. But that's a good intro book to AI.
Okay, and I'll make sure to put that
Mhm. Yeah.
down here. Okay, and our last speed round question. What is one thing about AI that still genuinely surprises you?
Ooh, that's a really good one. I think just the fact that the writing, because I'm a writer, right? A lot of the writing is also just like not that good. You would expect to be better because it's trained on text, but it's very generic and it's not as good as the real human writing. So I wouldn't put too much into it.
That is so true because it's the game changing clarity that we need to unleash. So we make sure to unlock our potential for the future. Yes, I'm with you on that one. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was fantastic. I will put all the links up and everything in the show notes, in the description, in the comments section so you can follow MJ, find out more about Credibly. And this was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. I love being here.
I told you that was going to be powerful, right? Well, if you found value in this interview, this video, this podcast, please click that subscribe button. Leave us a comment. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions for MJ, just leave those in the comment section too. We'll make sure that she gets a hold of those. And I think that's it. So, my name is Harrison Painter. This has been the AI for Everyone podcast. And until next time, keep creating, keep innovating, and most importantly, keep up. God bless you.